The last storm. The rain began to fall. At first it was like any other storm. A light drizzle that dampened the ground and left a coolness in the air. But then, as if the sky itself grew angry, the drops thickened and sharpened. Harshly it did fall, turning from rain to hail, and then into something more sinister. Jagged ice that plummeted from the heavens, striking the earth with a ferocity that shattered windows and dented cars. They were no longer pellets of frozen water. They felt like shards of glass, tearing through anything in their path. These jagged, rock-like ice cubes smashed into gas lines and power stations, each impact triggering explosions that bloomed like fiery flowers in the distance. The night was illuminated by flickering orange light, accompanied by the deep growl of thunder. It wasn't long before the lightning struck. Bolts forked through the dark sky, splitting the air with deafening cracks. The storms raged on, growing louder and closer, until it felt like the earth itself was shaking. Fires raged where the lightning struck, and for miles around, the scent of scorched earth and burning metal filled the air. As the hailstorm continued its furious assault, the earth beneath their feet began to shift. A rumble grew from below, like a beast waking from a long slumber. Earthquakes tore across the continent, splitting roads and swallowing buildings whole. Those who weren't buried alive beneath collapsing structures found themselves running from rising tides as massive waves surged inland, crashing as the shores and sweeping away entire towns. The Atlantic, the Pacific, they seemed to have lost their patience with humanity, rising in rebellion and swallowing all they touched. When the earth finally grew still and the skies ceased their roaring, only a few remained. The survivors gathered in the ruins, sifting through the soaked debris for anything that could sustain them. They scavenged cans, waterlogged boxes of crackers, and whatever else had managed to remain intact. Packs of strangers formed, some willing to share, others willing to take by force. It was a new world, where language barriers and cultural divides were a constant obstacle in the quest for survival. Some spoke Spanish, others Mandarin, Arabic, Swahili, and languages no one could recognize. The ruins of America became a babble of desperation. The survivors were scattered across what remained of the eastern coast, where the waters had yet to recede, and the mountains of debris had become their homes. They clung to whatever little hope they could find, drifting from one shattered town to another, whispering about the old world that had ended so suddenly. Many spoke of the dark days just before everything fell apart, the time before the storm. It had all begun with the death of the last presidential candidate, the final thread that had held some semblance of order together. He was a man with a wide smile and promises of a better future, but those promises died with him, suddenly and mysteriously. The doctors had called it a heart attack, but whispers circulated of foul play. Conspiracies spread like wildfire among the desperate. Some said he had been poisoned by rival politicians. Others believed that he was struck down by a hidden power that didn't want him to succeed. But whatever the truth, it no longer mattered. In the chaos that followed his death, society fractured, and then came the magnetic shift. No one knew why the Earth's magnetic field had shifted, only that it had set off a chain reaction of natural disasters. Scientists, or what was left of them, theorized that the shift triggered the earthquakes and disturbed the ocean's currents, leading to the massive tidal waves that washed away the coasts. They tried to explain, but by then their words were lost in the noise of crashing waves and shattering earth. The survivors had no choice but to keep moving. They traveled in ragtag groups, holding on to any scraps of hope they could find. Among them was Leon, a former software engineer from Beijing who had come to the United States for a tech conference, and Rosa, a single mother from Honduras who had crossed the border for a chance at a better life. Then there was Malik, an artist from Morocco, and Hector, a fisherman from Puerto Rico who knew the waters better than anyone else. In the old world, they never would have met, but now they were bound together by a shared will to live. Leanne, Rosa, Malik, and Hector scavenged among the ruins of what had once been a bustling city in the Carolinas. They picked their way through overturned cars and splintered beams, gathering food where they could find it, and looking out for others who might take what little they had. Each night they huddled around a small fire, sharing stories of the lives they had lost, of the families they would never see again. It was like the ocean just swallowed them, Hector murmured one evening, staring into the flames. His voice was rough, his eyes hollow. He spoke of the day the wave came for his village, how he had watched his family's house disappear beneath the water, how he'd fought against the current and barely made it out alive. Liane nodded, her eyes downcast. She had been thousands of miles from home when the shift happened, and now there was no way back. Do you think anyone's out there, trying to fix this? Malik shook his head. If they are, we'll never know. We're on our own now. Rosa wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the fire's warmth. We just have to keep going. There has to be something left, somewhere. They clung to that thought as they moved from town to town, each step taking them further into the unknown. But everywhere they went, they found the same thing. Abandoned houses, flooded streets, broken bridges, and the occasional human body, bloated and pale from the water's touch. Each new discovery chipped away at their hope, but they pressed on, unwilling to let the darkness consume them entirely. One day, as they scavenged near what had once been a shopping center, they stumbled upon a cache of supplies. Canned beans, dried fruits, even a few medical kits. For a brief moment, they allowed themselves to hope, but as they prepared to leave, they heard the rumble of footsteps behind them. Another group emerged from the shadows, ragged and desperate, their eyes glinting with hunger. There were no words exchanged, just the flash of knives and the scramble for survival. Liane and Rosa managed to fight their way free, dragging Malik and Hector away from the fray. They ran until their lungs burned, clutching the supplies they had managed to hold onto, their hearts pounding in their chests. When they finally stopped, panting and trembling, they realized that the world had changed them. They were no longer the people they had been before, but they were still alive. And in a world where everything else had been stripped away, that was all that mattered. As they looked out over the wreckage of a city that had once been filled with life, they understood that survival was not about finding a way back to the old world. It was about building something new from the ashes. The last storm might have broken the world, but it had not broken them. And as long as they had each other, there was still a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could survive whatever came next.